I stood alone at the edge of the cemetery, watching my mother's casket being lowered into the ground while my siblings huddled together 20 feet away, whispering among themselves like I didn't exist. The November wind cut through my dress blues, but not as sharply as their deliberate silence had cut through me all morning. My name is Rebecca Becca Thompson, and I'm a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. I've served 3 tours overseas, earned a Purple Heart, and led soldiers through some of the toughest situations you can imagine. But standing here, watching my own family treat me like a stranger at my mother's funeral, I felt more isolated than I ever had in the mountains of Afghanistan. It started when I enlisted 8 years ago, right after high school. Mom supported my decision, but my older brother Jake and my sister Emma thought I was throwing my life away. "You could have gone to college," Emma had said. "You could have been something." As if serving my country wasn't something. As if the uniform I wore with pride somehow made me less than them. The estrangement deepened with each deployment. While I was overseas, they moved on with their lives, got married, had kids, built careers. When I came home on leave, I was the outsider looking in on family gatherings, where inside jokes had replaced our shared memories. They'd talk around me, not to me, discussing people I didn't know and events I'd missed. Mom tried to bridge the gap, but even she seemed different after my last deployment. The IED that earned me my Purple Heart also earned me a limp and some scars that made family dinners uncomfortable. I could see it in their eyes. I wasn't the same Becca who left home full of dreams and determination. I was damaged goods, a reminder of things they'd rather not think about. The final blow came 6 months ago when Mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I requested emergency leave to be with her, but Jake made it clear I wasn't welcome. "She needs peace and quiet," he'd said over the phone, not someone bringing all that military baggage into her final days. Emma had agreed, suggesting I should respect the family's wishes and stay away. I stayed away, and it haunts me every single day. I missed her final weeks, missed holding her hand, missed saying goodbye properly. The only reason I even knew about the funeral was because Mom's neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, called me directly. Now, watching the honor guard fold the flag with military precision, I realized this would be my goodbye. The flag ceremony was the one thing my siblings couldn't take away from me. Mom had been an Army wife during Dad's service, and she'd specifically requested military honors. That's when I saw him. An older man in a worn Army dress uniform approached the honor guard. He spoke quietly to the sergeant, gesturing toward me, then toward my family. I couldn't hear what he said, but I watched as the sergeant nodded solemnly. Within minutes, something extraordinary began to happen. More veterans started appearing from among the scattered mourners. Some were in uniform, others in civilian clothes with military bearing that was unmistakable. They moved with quiet purpose, forming a line that stretched from the honor guard directly to where I stood. My siblings stopped their whispering and stared. The entire cemetery fell silent except for the sound of polished boots on grass and the distant flutter of flags in the wind. The older veteran who'd started it all walked over to me. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that come from years of service and sacrifice. "Staff Sergeant Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned his stripes the hard way. "Your mother served too, in her own way. She deserves better than this." I looked at the line of veterans standing at attention, creating a bridge between my isolation and my mother's final honors, and for the first time all day, I didn't feel alone. The older veteran's words hit me like a revelation, but before I could respond, Jake broke away from our family cluster and strode toward us, his face flushed with anger. "Excuse me, but this is a private family matter," he said, his voice carrying across the cemetery. "We don't need any military theatrics here." The veteran didn't move, didn't even acknowledge Jake's presence. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on mine. "Colonel William Hayes, retired," he said simply. "I served with your father in Vietnam. Your mother wrote to me about you, about your service, about how proud she was." My heart stopped. "Mom wrote to you? Every deployment, every promotion. She sent me copies of your commendations, photos from your ceremonies. She was so proud, Staff Sergeant, and so worried about this rift in your family." Colonel Hayes reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn envelope. "She asked me to give you this if anything happened to her, and if your family—" He glanced meaningfully toward Jake and Emma, who were now approaching with their spouses in tow. "Well, if they couldn't see past their own prejudices." Jake's voice rose. "Prejudices? We're We're not the ones who abandoned our family for some misguided sense of duty. Becca chose the military over us, chose strangers over her own blood. That's enough. The words came out of me with more force than I'd intended. 8 years of suppressed hurt and anger finally finding their voice. The line of veterans remained at attention, but I could feel their support like a wall at my back. I didn't choose strangers over family, Jake. I chose to serve something bigger than myself, and I never abandoned anyone. You pushed me away. Emma stepped forward, her designer heels sinking into the cemetery grass. You missed everything, Becca. Birthdays, holidays, graduations. You were never here when we needed you. I was fighting for your right to have those birthdays and holidays in freedom. I shot back. And when I came home, when I tried to be part of this family again, you treated me like I was contaminated, like my service was something shameful. The envelope in Colonel Hayes' hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Whatever Mom had written, whatever final words she'd left for me, I knew reading it would change everything. But I also knew that my siblings would never let me have this moment of peace, this connection to our mother's memory. Your mother was afraid this would happen, Colonel Hayes said quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. She was afraid that her death would be the final wedge that split this family apart forever. She made me promise to try to prevent that. Jake laughed bitterly. And you think a bunch of old soldiers playing dress-up is going to fix 8 years of Becca putting the army before her family? I think, Colonel Hayes replied, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command, that your mother's dying wish was for her children to remember that love doesn't have borders or uniforms. And I think she knew that if anyone was going to honor her memory properly, it would be the daughter who learned to serve others before herself. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the eyes of every mourner on us, could see the uncertainty flickering across my siblings' faces. This wasn't just about Mom's funeral anymore. This was about whether our family would survive her death, or whether the divide that had been growing for 8 years would become permanent. I looked at the envelope in Colonel Hayes' hand, then at my siblings' faces, and realized I was standing at a crossroads that would define the rest of my life. The envelope felt like it was burning in my hands as Colonel Hayes placed it there. I wanted to tear it open immediately, to hear Mom's voice one last time, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way Jake and Emma were staring at me, waiting for my next move like vultures circling wounded prey. Maybe it was the line of veterans still standing at attention behind me, their silent support both comforting and overwhelming. I can't do this here, I whispered to Colonel Hayes, my voice barely audible over the wind. Not like this. He nodded with understanding. There's a coffee shop about 2 miles from here, Murphy's Diner. Military friendly. Some of us were planning to gather there after the service anyway, to share stories about your parents. He glanced toward my siblings. All family welcome, of course. Jake scoffed. We have a reception planned at Emma's house, for actual family members. The words stung, but before I could respond, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Patterson, Mom's elderly neighbor, stepped forward from the crowd of mourners. Rebecca, honey, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the cemetery. Your mother talked about you constantly. She kept every letter you sent, every photo. She was so proud of you, and so heartbroken about this family situation. Emma shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Patterson, we appreciate your concern, but nothing, the older woman interrupted with surprising firmness. Eleanor made me promise something before she died. She made me promise that if her children couldn't find their way back to each other after she was gone, I'd speak up. Mrs. Patterson looked directly at me. She left something for you at my house, dear. Something she wanted you to have before you read that letter. My siblings exchanged glances. Jake's jaw tightened. What kind of something? The kind of something that might help you all remember who you used to be before pride and stubbornness got in the way, Mrs. Patterson replied. She turned back to me. Would you come by this afternoon? Around 3? I found myself nodding before I'd even fully processed the request. Something about Mrs. Patterson's tone, the way she'd spoken about Mom's wishes, made it impossible to refuse. But I could feel the tension radiating from Jake and Emma like heat from a furnace. Fine, Emma said suddenly, surprising everyone. We'll all go. If Mom left something for Becca, we should all hear what it is. Jake looked like he wanted to protest, but his wife Jennifer placed a restraining hand on his arm. Maybe Emma's right, Jennifer said quietly. Maybe we owe it to your mother to try. Colonel Hayes smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Murphy's Diner at 1 o'clock, then Mrs. Patterson's at 3. Gives everyone time to process, time to think about what Eleanor would have wanted. As the crowd began to disperse, I watched my siblings walk away without another word to me. But for the first time in 8 years, they hadn't completely shut the door. Emma's decision to include herself in Mrs. Patterson's invitation felt like a crack in the wall they'd built around themselves, a tiny opening that might lead somewhere. The veterans began filing past me, each one offering a quiet word of support or a firm handshake. Some shared brief stories about serving with Dad. Others simply said they'd heard good things about my service. By the time the last one had gone, I felt like I was carrying the weight of their expectations along with my own grief. Colonel Hayes remained beside me as the cemetery emptied. "Your mother knew this day would come," he said. "She prepared for it. Trust her wisdom, Staff Sergeant. Trust that she knew her children better than they know themselves." I clutched the unopened envelope and wondered if Mom's final gift would be enough to bridge 8 years of hurt, or if some wounds were too deep to heal. Murphy's Diner was exactly what I'd expected. Red vinyl booths, checkered linoleum floors, and the kind of coffee that could wake the dead. When I arrived at 1 o'clock, I found Colonel Hayes sitting with 3 other veterans at a corner table. They stood as I approached, a gesture of respect that still caught me off guard in civilian settings. "Staff Sergeant," Colonel Hayes said, pulling out a chair, "I'd like you to meet some people who knew your parents." The introductions were brief but meaningful. Master Sergeant Rita Valdez had served with me in Afghanistan, though we'd never crossed paths until today. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams had been Dad's Navy liaison during a joint operation in the 70s, and Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez had been Mom's pen pal for over a decade, part of a support network she'd built for military families. "Your mother was something special," Sergeant Rodriguez said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "When my son deployed to Iraq, she sent care packages every month. Never met the kid, but she treated him like her own. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. She never told me about that. She helped a lot of families," Master Sergeant Valdez added. "Quietly, always quietly. She said it was her way of serving alongside her husband and daughter." The conversation flowed easily. Stories about Mom's volunteer work with veterans' families, her advocacy for better mental health resources, her tireless letter-writing campaigns to deployed soldiers who had no one else. With each story, I realized how little I'd known about the woman who'd raised me. While I'd been focused on my own service, she'd been building her own legacy of service at home. But at 2:45, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Jake's not coming to Mrs. Patterson's. Says he's done with military melodrama. I'll be there, but this better not be some elaborate guilt trip." My stomach dropped. I'd been cautiously optimistic that we might actually have a chance to bridge the gap between us, but Jake's absence felt like a door slamming shut before it had even opened properly. Colonel Hayes noticed my expression. "Bad news?" "Jake's backing out," I said, showing him the text. "Emma's coming, but she's already defensive. This is going to be a disaster." "Maybe," he said thoughtfully. "Or maybe your mother knew exactly what she was doing." We arrived at Mrs. Patterson's small ranch house at exactly 3 o'clock. Emma was already there, sitting stiffly on the floral couch with her arms crossed. She'd changed out of her funeral dress into jeans and a sweater, but her posture screamed reluctance. "Where's Jake?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "He said he's had enough emotional manipulation for one day," Emma replied without looking at me. His words, not mine. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the kitchen carrying a shoebox and a manila envelope. "I'm sorry Jake couldn't make it, but perhaps this will help him understand later." She sat down across from us, the box balanced carefully on her knees. "Your mother started putting this together about 2 years ago, when her diagnosis became clear. She called it her bridge box." Emma leaned forward despite herself. "What's in it?" "Letters," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "Letters you wrote to your mother, Rebecca, and letters she wrote to you but never sent. Letters she wrote to Jake and Emma about you, and letters she wrote to you about them." She paused, her weathered hands trembling slightly. "And one very special item that she hoped would remind you all of who you used to be." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Whatever was in that box had the power to either heal my family or destroy what little remained of it. Emma's expression had shifted from defensive to curious, but I could see the fear lurking behind her eyes, the same fear I was feeling. Mrs. Patterson opened the box, and the first thing I saw was a faded army patch, one I recognized immediately. It was Dad's unit patch from his first deployment to Vietnam, the one he'd worn when he met Mom at a USO dance in 1968. But it wasn't just any patch. It was the exact one, because I could see the tiny tear in the corner where he'd caught it on barbed wire during a patrol. Mom had sewn it back together with red thread, the only color she had available, creating a small heart-shaped repair that had become their private symbol. She kept this all these years, Mrs. Patterson said softly, lifting the patch with reverence. But look underneath, Emma gasped. Beneath the patch was a photograph I'd never seen before. Dad in his dress uniform, Mom in her wedding dress, and between them, a 5-year-old Jake, 3-year-old Emma, and baby me, all of us wearing matching military family pins that read, "Proud Army Family." We were laughing at something off camera, Jake's small hand reaching up to touch Dad's medals while Emma tried to straighten my tiny dress uniform. "I don't remember this," Emma whispered, her defensive posture crumbling. "I don't remember us ever being like this." Mrs. Patterson pulled out a letter with Emma's name on it. "Your mother wrote this last month, when she knew she was running out of time." She handed it to Emma, then pulled out another one addressed to me. She wanted you both to read these together, and then decide whether Jake needed to see his. Emma's hands shook as she opened her letter. I could see tears forming in her eyes as she read, but she didn't share the contents. My own letter felt impossibly heavy in my hands. When I finally opened it, Mom's familiar handwriting blurred through my tears. "My dearest Becca," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll be gone, and I'm afraid my greatest failure as a mother will be complete. I failed to keep my family together. I failed to make Jake and Emma understand that your service was never about leaving us. It was about loving us enough to protect what we represent. I failed to make you understand that their fear of losing you made them push you away before you could leave them first." The letter went on to detail conversations I'd never known about. Jake crying when my unit was deployed to a particularly dangerous region, Emma secretly following my military career online and printing out articles about my commendations, both of them terrified that one day they'd get the call that I wasn't coming home. "They love you so much, it frightens them," Mom had written. "And you love them so much that you've let their fear drive you away rather than fight for them. You're all so stubborn, so proud, so afraid of being vulnerable, just like your father and me when we were young." But it was the final paragraph that broke me completely. "I'm dying, sweetheart, and I can't fix this before I go. I can't force you all to see past your hurt and fear. I can only hope that when I'm gone, you'll realize that life is too short for pride, too precious for grudges, and too fragile to waste on being right instead of being together. If I failed you as a mother, please don't fail each other as siblings." I looked up to find Emma sobbing silently, her letter clutched against her chest. "She knew," Emma choked out. "She knew we were scared of losing you, and she knew you thought we hated you, and she tried so hard to fix it." Mrs. Patterson reached into the box one more time and pulled out Jake's letter, sealed and waiting. "She made me promise that if you two could find your way back to each other, I'd call Jake and tell him there was something here he needed to see. But if you couldn't," she left the sentence hanging. I stared at the sealed envelope, knowing that whatever was inside represented our last chance as a family. But Emma was already reaching for her phone, and I realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. Emma's hands trembled as she dialed Jake's number. I watched her face cycle through determination, fear, and something that looked like hope as she waited for him to answer. When he picked up on the 4th ring, his voice was clipped and irritated. "Emma, I told you I'm done with this whole—" "Jake, stop." Emma's voice was stronger than I'd heard it all day. "Mom wrote us letters. All of us. And there's something here you need to see." She paused, looking directly at me for the first time in years. "We were wrong. We were so wrong about everything." I could hear Jake's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. Emma's expression shifted as she listened, and I saw the exact moment when her resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "No, Jake. You don't get to decide this time. You don't get to make the choice for all of us anymore." Her voice carried an authority I'd never heard from her before. "I'm bringing Becca to your house. We're coming together, and you're going to listen to what Mom had to say. And if you refuse to open the door, I'll read her letter to you through the window until your neighbors call the police." She hung up before he could respond and turned to Mrs. Patterson. "May I take his letter?" Mrs. Patterson nodded, pressing the sealed envelope into Emma's hands. "Your mother would be proud of you for fighting for your family," The drive to Jake's house was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Emma sat in the passenger seat of my rental car, clutching our mother's letters and Jake's unopened envelope like they were sacred texts. Neither of us spoke, but the silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was the quiet of two people preparing for battle, gathering their courage for what might be their last chance to save something precious. "I need to tell you something," Emma said as we pulled into Jake's driveway. "When you were deployed the second time, Jake had nightmares. He'd wake up screaming your name, convinced he'd gotten the call that you were dead. Jennifer had to sleep in the guest room for months because he'd thrash around so violently." My chest tightened. He never said anything. He was terrified that if he admitted how much he cared, how much he worried, it would somehow make it more likely that something would happen to you, like his fear could reach across the ocean and put you in danger. Emma's voice broke slightly. "We all thought that if we didn't get too attached, if we kept some distance, it would hurt less if we lost you." I stared at Jake's front door, seeing it differently now. It wasn't a barrier keeping me out. It was a fortress he'd built to protect himself from the unbearable possibility of losing me, and I'd been so hurt by his distance that I'd never tried to understand the fear behind it. "What if he won't listen?" I asked. "What if this just makes everything worse?" Emma reached over and squeezed my hand, the first physical contact we'd had in years. "Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know we didn't let pride win." She took a shaky breath. "Mom's letter. She said she was proud of both of us, but she was most proud of the way we used to take care of each other when we were kids. She said Jake always made sure you had the biggest piece of cake, and you always made sure I got the window seat in the car, and I always made sure Jake's homework was done before Dad got home from work." The memory hit me like a physical blow. We had taken care of each other once. Before fear and pride and hurt feelings built walls between us, we'd been a team. Emma opened her car door. "Come on, sister. Let's go get our brother back." Jake opened the door before we could even knock, his face a mask of barely controlled emotion. His eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see Jennifer hovering anxiously in the hallway behind him, with their two young children peeking around her legs. The sight of those kids, my nephew and niece who barely knew me, hit me harder than any IED blast ever had. "I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish here," Jake said, but his voice lacked the conviction it had carried at the cemetery. He looked exhausted, like a man who'd been fighting a war he was tired of winning. Emma held up Mom's letter with his name on it. She knew Jake. She knew about the nightmares, about the fear, about all of it. And she knew that we've all been too stubborn and too scared to admit that we're destroying exactly what we're trying to protect. "Don't." Jake's voice cracked. "Don't you dare use Mom's death to manipulate me into some tearful reunion. I've spent 8 years watching my sister choose everything else over her family. I've spent 8 years explaining to my kids why their aunt doesn't come to Christmas, why she misses their birthdays, why she... Because you told me not to come." The words exploded out of me with 8 years of suppressed pain behind them. Every time I tried to come home, every time I called, every time I reached out, you made it clear I wasn't welcome. You treated my service like it was a personal betrayal instead of a sacrifice I made for all of us. Jake's facade finally cracked completely. "Because I was terrified," he shouted, his composure shattering like glass. "Because every single day you were deployed, I lived in fear that 2 soldiers would show up at my door to tell me my baby sister was dead. Because I couldn't handle loving you that much and knowing I might lose you, so I convinced myself it was easier to lose you on my terms." The admission hung in the air between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. I could see Jennifer in the background, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood the real reason behind years of family tension. Emma stepped forward and pressed Jake's letter into his hands. Mom understood. She understood all of it. The fear, the pride, the way we all protected ourselves by hurting each other first. She looked between us, and I saw something in her expression that reminded me of the little girl who used to mediate our childhood fights. But she also knew that we were stronger together than apart. She knew that our family was worth fighting for. Jake's hands shook as he opened the envelope. I watched his face as he read, saw the exact moment when his defenses finally crumbled completely. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes full of regret, and something that looked like hope. "She wrote about the time you got suspended for fighting Tommy Morrison, because he said military families were stupid," he said quietly. "You were 10 years old, and you came home with a black eye and told Dad it was worth it because nobody gets to insult our family. She said you've been fighting for us your whole life, and we've been too blind to see it. I felt tears I'd been holding back for years finally break free. I never stopped fighting for this family, Jake. Even when you pushed me away, even when it felt like you hated me, I never stopped believing that someday we'd find our way back to each other. Jake dropped the letter and stepped forward, pulling me into a hug that 8 years of hurt and fear and stubborn pride couldn't break. Emma wrapped her arms around both of us, and for the first time since I'd put on the uniform, I felt like I was truly home. 3 months later, I'm sitting in Jake's backyard watching my nephew Tommy try to teach my niece Lucy how to throw a football while Emma documents everything with her camera. It's Thanksgiving, and for the first time in 8 years, our family is complete. The healing didn't happen overnight. There were difficult conversations, tears, and moments when old patterns of hurt tried to resurface. But Mom's letters became our roadmap back to each other. We read them together, talked through years of misunderstandings, and slowly began rebuilding the trust we'd lost. Jake started therapy to deal with his anxiety about my deployments. Emma joined a military family support group to better understand what service members go through. And I learned to be more patient with their fears, to call more often, to make them feel included in my military life instead of protected from it. The biggest change came when I decided to transition to a stateside position, not because my family demanded it, but because I realized I was ready for a new chapter. I'm now working as a military liaison, helping other service members navigate family relationships and reintegration challenges. It turns out all those years of managing my own family crisis gave me exactly the experience I needed to help others. Colonel Hayes became a regular fixture at our family gatherings, sharing stories about Dad and helping us understand the military culture that had seemed so foreign to Jake and Emma. Mrs. Patterson adopted us all as honorary grandchildren, and her house became neutral ground when we needed space to work through difficult emotions. The most precious moment came last month when Tommy, now 7, told his class that his aunt was a hero who fought for their freedom. When the teacher asked him how he knew, he said, "Because she has medals, but also because she never gave up on our family, even when we gave up on her." Today, watching my family laugh together, I'm struck by how different everything feels. The walls of hurt and misunderstanding that seemed so permanent have been replaced by something stronger, a foundation built on honest communication, mutual respect, and the understanding that love sometimes means being vulnerable enough to admit when you're wrong. Emma's husband, David, who I barely knew before, has become one of my closest confidants. Jennifer and I bond over our shared experience of loving stubborn Thompson siblings. And Jake has become the protective older brother I always needed him to be, just in a way that supports my choices instead of fighting them. As the sun sets over Jake's backyard and our family settles in for another evening of catching up and making new memories, I can't help but think about all the other military families out there struggling with similar challenges. The distance, the misunderstandings, the fear that service means choosing country over family, when it should mean serving both. Mom's final gift wasn't just healing our family, it was showing me my purpose beyond the uniform. Every week, I meet with families facing the same struggles we overcame, and I share our story of finding our way back to each other. If you're dealing with family challenges related to military service, know that healing is possible. It takes courage, patience, and sometimes the wisdom of those who've walked this path before us. These stories matter, these journeys matter, and sharing them helps others find hope in their darkest moments. I'd love to hear your own stories of family, service, and healing in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to hear more real stories about military families finding their way back to each other. Because sometimes, the most important battles we fight are the ones that bring us home to the people who matter most.